Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to meet you again in today's story. On the Darkness Prevails channel, we would like to present you a story. Now we invite you to listen to this story. Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little trip, a journey not just across miles, but across millennia. Picture this. The air is impossibly still, heavy with a heat that's baked the land for longer than human minds can truly comprehend. Giant stone faces, weathered by countless sunsets, stare out with an unnerving blankness. You're surrounded by sand, an ocean of it, stretching to a hazy horizon where the sky melts into the earth. And beneath that sand, oh, the secrets it holds. We're delving into ancient Egypt, specifically into 7 of its mysteries that, even now, with all our fancy technology and clever brains, remain stubbornly unexplained. Some of them are downright unsettling. Let's be honest, if you were actually dropped into some of these scenarios, you probably wouldn't survive this encounter with the truly unknown, not without a very good guide and maybe a mild sedative. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support means the world, or in this case, maybe the ancient world. And hey, drop a comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you, even in imagination, is the sheer scale of Egypt's antiquity. We talk about ancient history, but Egypt takes that to a whole new level. Think about it. Cleopatra, a figure so synonymous with ancient Egypt and popular culture, lived closer in time to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's a mind-boggling stretch of human endeavor, of dynasties rising and falling, gods worshipped and forgotten, and secrets buried layer upon layer. You're walking through a landscape where the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams might have once settled on the brow of a pharaoh, or brushed past a priest chanting in a language that now only whispers from stone. And it's these whispers we're tuning into tonight. Not the well-trodden tales of famous pharaohs you learn in school, though they're fascinating enough. We're venturing into the shadows, the gaps in the historical record, the places where the papyrus scrolls crumble into frustrating silence. These are the enigmas that keep archaeologists up at night, scratching their heads and probably muttering into their lukewarm tea. You can almost feel the oppressive weight of unanswered questions hanging in the dry desert air. It's one thing to not know something because the evidence is lost. It's another entirely when the evidence is there, staring you in the face, yet stubbornly refusing to yield its meaning. It's like an ancient cosmic joke, and we're still waiting for the punchline. Maybe the punchline is just more sand. It does get everywhere, doesn't it? Even in your conceptual ancient Egyptian adventure. The lifeblood of this ancient civilization, as you likely know, was the Nile River. The annual inundation, the flooding of the Nile, was remarkably predictable and brought fertile black silt, laying the foundation for Egypt's agricultural wealth and stability for thousands of years. This rhythm of flood and harvest shaped their worldview, their religion, their very concept of time as cyclical and eternal. But even with something as fundamental as the Nile, there are nuances and adaptations that still spark curiosity. Imagine relying so completely on a single natural phenomenon year after year, century after century. The faith, or perhaps the sheer pragmatism, involved is staggering. Yet, for all that was recorded, for all the monumental efforts to ensure remembrance, so much remained shrouded. When early European explorers first encountered the wonders of Egypt, especially before Jean-François Champollion famously deciphered hieroglyphs in the 1820s using the Rosetta Stone, their interpretations were creative, to say the least. Some genuinely believed the pyramids were granaries built by the biblical Joseph, while others, gazing at the strange animal-headed gods and intricate carvings, posited theories involving lost super-civilizations, giants, or even visitors from other worlds. It's easy to chuckle now, armed with our greater understanding, but it highlights how profoundly alien and imposing these remnants were, and in some ways still are. It's a good reminder that when faced with something truly inexplicable, the human mind loves to fill in the blanks, sometimes with stories wilder than any fiction. I mean, can you blame them? You see a 480-foot tall stone mountain in the middle of nowhere, you're going to have thoughts. These aren't just intellectual puzzles for academics in dusty libraries. They touch upon something deeply human, our desire to understand our past, to know where we came from, and perhaps to glean some wisdom or warning from those who walked the earth before us. The Egyptians themselves were obsessed with legacy, with cheating death through remembrance and monument. The irony is that they succeeded almost too well, leaving behind mysteries so profound they ensure we'll never quite forget them, even if we can't fully understand them. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians possessed a more advanced understanding of certain sciences, like astronomy or mathematics, than currently credited, based on the precision of their constructions and alignments. Are these anomalies hints of forgotten knowledge, or are we simply projecting our own modern biases onto the past, seeing patterns where none were intended? That's the tightrope you walk when you delve into these ancient enigmas. And it's not just the grand, monumental mysteries. Sometimes it's the smaller, more personal items that whisper the loudest, the little details that hint at a worldview so different from our own, it's almost terrifying to contemplate. Imagine sifting through the sand, not for gold or grand statues, but for the everyday objects, the tools, the toys, the faded remnants of lives lived. Each one is a tiny key, but to what door? And what happens when the keys don't seem to fit any locks we recognize? That's where the real chill begins, not from a supernatural spook, but from the vast, echoing silence of the truly unknown. You feel like you're on the edge of a colossal understanding, but the final piece of the puzzle is always just out of reach, perhaps deliberately so. The ancient world doesn't give up its secrets easily, especially not the ones that have been kept for 4,000 or 5,000 years. They've had practice at being enigmatic, and frankly, they're rather good at it. So as we prepare to delve into our first specific, terrifying enigma, let that sense of profound antiquity and unsettling mystery settle around you. The desert wind is picking up, carrying the scent of dust and time, and the stars overhead are the same stars that once shone down on pharaohs and tomb robbers alike. You're a long way from home, and the journey ahead is into the heart of questions that have baffled the best of us for centuries. And the first, most colossal question mark squatting on the desert landscape has to be the Great Pyramid of Giza. You're standing at its base, or at least you're imagining you are. The sun beats down, the same sun that baked the original builders. You crane your neck, and it just goes up and up and up a man-made mountain of stone, so vast it seems to distort the very air around it. It's not just one mystery here. It's a matryoshka doll of enigmas, each one nested inside another. But let's start with the basics, the building blocks themselves. We're talking about an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks. 2.3 million. The average weight of one of these limestone or granite blocks, about 2.5 tons. That's the weight of a couple of decent-sized cars. And there are millions of them. Now try to get your head around that. Most of us struggle to move a heavy sofa across a room, even with a friend. These guys were quarrying, shaping, transporting, and lifting car-sized blocks of stone, day in, day out for decades. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built as a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu, a ruler of the 4th dynasty, over what is generally accepted to be a 20 to 27-year period during the 26th century BCE. That's a mainstream historical fact, the bedrock of Egyptology. It's what the textbooks will tell you. But knowing who it was for and roughly when it was built doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of how. How did they achieve such a monumental feat with the tools available to them? Copper chisels, dolerite pounders, wooden levers, and rollers. The sheer logistics are enough to make your modern project manager brain explode. Even the casing stones, the fine white Tura limestone that once made the pyramid gleam like a polished jewel, were fitted with such precision that, as Herodotus famously noted, though centuries later, you could barely insert a knife blade between them. Many of those are gone now, repurposed for buildings in Cairo over the centuries, but the core structure still testifies to this incredible accuracy. It wasn't just about piling stones. It was about architectural and engineering genius on a scale that remains breathtaking. Think about the king's chamber, deep within the pyramid. It's lined with massive granite blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons. 80 tons. These weren't quarried locally. They were brought from Aswan, over 500 miles to the south. They were transported, presumably by barge up the Nile, and then somehow maneuvered into the heart of this rising stone behemoth and lifted to a height of around 140 feet. Debate rages on among Egyptologists and engineers regarding the exact methods used for lifting these heaviest blocks to the upper courses of the Great Pyramid. This is where the arguments really start to get heated, and where the more out there theories begin to creep in from the fringes. Could you imagine the health and safety report for that job? It'd be longer than the Nile itself. The standard explanations involve ramps. Lots and lots of ramps. Perhaps a long, straight ramp, gradually increasing in height as the pyramid grew. But the sheer size such a ramp would need to be, potentially even larger in volume than the pyramid itself, presents its own enormous problems. Where did all that material come from, and where did it go afterwards? Then there are theories of zigzagging ramps on the pyramid's faces, or internal ramps spiraling up within the structure itself, which we'll touch on more when we venture inside. Each theory has its proponents, its evidence, and its equally compelling counterarguments. You can almost hear the ghostly foreman shouting, not in frustration, but with a kind of ancient, knowing chuckle. Figure that one out, future people. It's like they left behind the ultimate construction puzzle, and half the pieces are deliberately missing. And the workforce? Forget the old Hollywood image of legions of slaves being whipped into submission. The workers at Giza were, by most modern scholarly accounts, skilled laborers, Egyptian citizens who were housed in organized villages, fed, and even received medical care. Their rations famously included a daily allotment of beer and bread, with the beer being a staple source of nutrition and hydration rather than an afterwork tipple. Think of it as an ancient energy drink, though probably not with the same sugary kick. Still, even with a well-fed, skilled workforce, the sheer human effort required is almost beyond our comprehension. Imagine the scene: thousands of men quarrying stone under a blazing sun, the rhythmic chip-chip-chip of copper tools, the grunts and shouts as massive blocks were levered onto wooden sledges, the smell of sweat, dust, and Nile water used to lubricate the paths. It's a scene of organized chaos, of immense, focused human power. You almost get tired just thinking about the exertion, so you're staring at these colossal stones, each one a testament to an almost unimaginable effort. You run your hand over the weathered surface. It's rough now, pockmarked by millennia of wind and sand, but once it was smooth, part of a perfect, sloping face. The terrifying part isn't a ghost or a curse in this instance. It's the chilling realization of the scale of human will and organization required, and the gnawing question of whether our understanding of their capabilities is fundamentally flawed. Are we missing a key piece of their technological puzzle? Or were they simply masters of leverage, manpower, and project management on a level we can no longer replicate, or perhaps even fully respect? The silence of the stones offers no easy answers, only a weighty, enduring presence that challenges your assumptions about what primitive people could achieve. They didn't have CAD software or laser levels, yet here it stands, a silent rebuke to our modern technological arrogance. It makes assembling that flat-pack bookshelf seem like child's play, doesn't it? At least your bookshelf doesn't weigh 2.5 million tons. Now let's take a breath, a slightly dusty one, and imagine ourselves slipping through a narrow opening, a forced passage perhaps, into the cool, slightly musty interior of Khufu's Great Pyramid. The oppressive heat of the desert outside is replaced by a different kind of oppression, the immense weight of millions of tons of stone pressing down from all sides. The air is still ancient. You're not supposed to be here, not really. This was meant to be a sealed, eternal resting place, not a tourist attraction or an archaeological puzzle box. But here you are, treading lightly, your footsteps echoing unnervingly in the tight corridors. We're moving beyond the sheer brute force of moving the blocks on the outside and venturing into the equally perplexing questions of the pyramid's internal structure and the technologies that might have been employed to create it. The known passages and chambers, the Grand Gallery, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Subterranean Chamber, are marvels of engineering in their own right. The precision of the stonework continues even deep within, far from public view. The Grand Gallery, for instance, is a corbelled hall, meaning each course of stones in its walls projects slightly inwards as it rises, creating a narrow, soaring space over 28 feet high and 153 feet long. Its purpose is still debated. Was it merely a sophisticated architectural feature to manage the immense stresses, a symbolic passage for the pharaoh's soul, or did it play a more practical role during construction? This is where those theories of internal ramps really gain traction. French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, in particular, has championed the idea of an internal ramp that spiraled upwards within the pyramid's core as it was being built. This would solve many of the problems associated with external ramps, such as their sheer size and the need for subsequent dismantling. According to this theory, the Grand Gallery itself might have been instrumental in hoisting the massive granite beams for the King's Chamber using a system of counterweights and trolleys. You can almost picture the scene, teams of workers, straining in the dim light, hauling these multi-ton behemoths up through the heart of the growing structure. A quirky tidbit that lends some circumstantial support to this is the discovery of a notch or void in the pyramid's northeast edge, detected through microgravimetry surveys, which Houdin suggests could be a remnant of this internal ramp system. It's like finding a tiny, almost invisible seam in a perfectly tailored suit. You just know it means something. Of course, without actually disassembling the pyramid, which, let's face it, is not going to happen, nor should it. Proving such a theory definitively is incredibly difficult. Historians still argue whether the complexity of an internal ramp system is plausible given the known tools and organizational capabilities of the Fourth Dynasty, or if simpler, albeit massive, external ramps are still the more likely explanation. It's a classic case of Occam's razor versus the sheer mind-boggling audacity of the monument itself. Did they opt for the simplest on-paper solution, even if it was monumentally resource-intensive, or did they employ a more sophisticated, smarter not harder approach that we're only now beginning to glimpse? And what about lost technologies? This is where you tiptoe from mainstream archaeology into slightly more speculative territory. While no one is seriously suggesting laser beams or anti-gravity, well, almost no one who wants to keep their academic credentials, the precision cutting and drilling found on some of the granite artifacts, particularly the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber, have led some to question whether their copper tools were really up to the task, even with abrasives like quartz sand. Some fringe researchers point to alleged evidence of extremely rapid drilling speeds or perfectly circular core drill holes that seem to defy explanation by conventional means. Are these misinterpretations of the evidence? Or are we underestimating their metallurgical skills or their understanding of mechanical advantage? Perhaps they had hardened copper alloys whose recipes are now lost, or methods of using abrasive powders that were far more efficient than we imagine. It's a bit like trying to understand how a master chef creates a signature dish with only a list of ingredients and no instructions. You know what went in, but the magic is in the method. And the ancient Egyptian chefs of stone were clearly master craftsmen. Imagine the scene inside those rising corridors. The air thick with fine stone dust, the flickering light of oil lamps, assuming they weren't using the dendrolite, which we'll get to, casting long, dancing shadows. The constant sound of hammering, chipping, and the shouts of foremen echoing in confined spaces. It would have been a claustrophobic, dangerous, and incredibly focused environment. You might even wonder if some of the workers, toiling away deep inside this man-made mountain, ever felt a flicker of fear, a sense of being swallowed by their own creation. It's a terrifying thought, to be a tiny cog in such an immense, almost geological process. And what if one of those 80-ton granite beams slipped? Best not to think about that. Just keep shuffling along the passage. Try not to bump your head. Though, honestly, in some of these low-slung corridors, bumping your head is practically a rite of passage. Consider it an authentic ancient Egyptian experience. Minus the actual ancient Egyptians, the lost tech angle isn't just about cutting stone either. It extends to their surveying and alignment. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with astonishing accuracy, an error of only a few arc minutes. How do they achieve this without compasses or modern surveying equipment? Theories involve meticulous astronomical observations, perhaps sighting stars from a circular enclosure, or using the shadows cast by the sun. Whatever the method, it required patience, precision, and a sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. One quirky, though less techy, detail is that the pyramid's base isn't perfectly square. The sides vary by a few inches, yet the overall precision is still remarkable for such a massive structure. It's a human touch within the divine scale. So, as you mentally navigate these dark, ancient passages, ponder the ingenuity. Were they simply masters of the known, pushing conventional techniques to their absolute limits? Or did they possess knowledge, perhaps empirical rather than theoretical, that has since faded from human memory, leaving us to marvel at the results without fully grasping the process? The silence of the pyramid heart is profound, but it's a silence that speaks volumes about human ambition and the enduring power of mystery. The stones hold their secrets tight, perhaps chuckling at our modern attempts to pry them loose with sonar and ground-penetrating radar. They've been here a long time. They can wait. Leaving the cool, echoing interior of Khufu's monument, you step back out into the blazing Egyptian sun, blinking as your eyes readjust. But our journey through Giza's enigmas isn't quite over. Before you, crouching eternally on the plateau, is another of Egypt's most iconic and baffling structures, the Great Sphinx. It's enormous, a lion's body with a human head, carved from a single outcrop of bedrock. It gazes eastward, a silent sentinel that has witnessed millennia of sunrises, of dynasties rising and falling, of invading armies and curious tourists. And its stare, well, its stare seems to hold the weight of all that time, and perhaps a few secrets it's not quite ready to share. You've seen the pictures, of course. Everyone has. But to imagine yourself there, dwarfed by its sheer scale, over 240 feet long and 66 feet high, is something else. The head alone is massive, though somewhat disproportionately small for the body, a detail that has fueled endless speculation. The mainstream historical view is that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre, Khufu's son, around 2500 BCE, and that the face of the Sphinx is his. This neatly places its construction within the same burst of monumental building activity as the pyramids of Giza. The nearby Khafre's pyramid, slightly smaller than Khufu's but built on higher ground, even has a causeway that aligns with the Sphinx temple complex, further cementing this connection. It all seems to fit a nice, tidy package. But as with so many things in ancient Egypt, the tidy package has a few loose threads, and if you pull on them, the whole thing starts to unravel just a little. One of the most persistent and controversial challenges to the Sphinx's conventional dating comes not from archaeologists, but from geologists, particularly focusing on the weathering patterns on its body and the walls of the enclosure from which it was carved. You see, the Sphinx is made of limestone, a sedimentary rock susceptible to erosion. And the type of erosion visible, particularly the deep vertical fissures and undulating surfaces, looks remarkably like water erosion. Specifically, erosion caused by prolonged and heavy rainfall. Now, you might be thinking, rainfall? In Egypt? Isn't it like a desert? And you'd be right for the most part. The Giza Plateau today is arid, but it wasn't always so. A quirky tidbit is that the Sahara Desert itself is geologically young, having gone through periods of being much wetter and greener, with the last major green Sahara period ending thousands of years before Khafre's reign. Proponents of the water erosion hypothesis, like geologist Robert Schoch, argue that the weathering on the Sphinx suggests it must have been carved before the region became so dry, perhaps as far back as 7000 BCE or even earlier, during a time when Egypt experienced significantly more rainfall. If true, this would push the Sphinx's origins back thousands of years, predating the known pharaonic civilization by an enormous margin. It would mean that some unknown, sophisticated culture was capable of carving such a massive monument long before the Egyptians we recognize. This idea, as you can imagine, is explosive. It challenges the entire established timeline of Egyptian history and, by extension, human civilization. Egyptologists largely reject the water erosion hypothesis, arguing that other forms of weathering, such as wind erosion carrying abrasive sand, dew condensation, and the natural flaking of the poor-quality limestone layers from which the Sphinx is carved, can account for the observed patterns. They also point to the lack of archaeological evidence for a sufficiently advanced culture in Egypt at such an early date capable of such a feat. Historians still argue whether the geological evidence for extreme antiquity of the Sphinx is compelling enough to overturn the substantial archaeological and textual evidence linking it to Khafre's reign. It's a fierce debate, with geologists looking at the stone and archaeologists looking at the context, and both sides firmly entrenched. It's like two experts examining an elephant, one by touch and the other by smell, and coming to wildly different conclusions about what kind of beast it is. Both are sure they're right. You stand there, metaphorically, looking at the Sphinx's impassive face. Its nose is famously missing, broken off sometime between the 10th and 15th centuries, not by Napoleon's cannonballs, that's a myth. Its beard, or fragments of it, are in the British Museum. It has been buried by sand up to its neck multiple times throughout its long history, most famously being excavated by the young pharaoh Thutmose IV around 1400 BCE. He even erected a stele between its paws, the dream stele, recounting how the Sphinx appeared to him in a dream, promising him a throne if he would clear away the sand. So this monument has been an object of awe and restoration for millennia, even to the ancient Egyptians themselves. The terrifying aspect here isn't a monster or a curse, but the potential abyss of lost history. If the Sphinx is older, who built it? Why? What happened to them? It's the fear of the unknown magnified, the unsettling possibility that our neatly constructed historical narratives are built on foundations of sand, both literally and figuratively. It makes you question what else we might have wrong, what other monumental truths might be hiding in plain sight, obscured only by our unwillingness to see them. Even if you stick with the conventional dating, the Sphinx is still a profound enigma. Why a lion's body and a human head? Was it simply a guardian figure, a symbol of royal power combining the strength of a lion with the intellect of the pharaoh? Or did it have a deeper astronomical or religious significance that we no longer grasp? The name Sphinx is actually Greek. We don't know for sure what the ancient Egyptians originally called it, though Horus in the horizon, is a strong contender, linking it to the sun god. Its eastward gaze towards a rising sun certainly supports this solar connection. It makes you wonder if on certain equinoxes or solstices, its shadow, or the light interacting with it in the nearby pyramids, created some kind of sacred spectacle, a celestial clockwork we can only now vaguely imagine. It's another layer to its timeless mystery, its silent stony stare challenging you to look deeper, beyond the obvious, into the heart of an ancient mind, still under the watchful, enigmatic gaze of the Sphinx, you find your attention drawn not just to its weathered surface or its debated age, but to what might lie beneath it. For decades, perhaps even centuries, rumors and legends have swirled about hidden chambers and secret passages associated with this colossal guardian. Could the Sphinx be more than just a statue? Could it be a literal key or a marker to something even more profound, a repository of lost knowledge, perhaps even a mythical hall of records? You can almost feel a subtle vibration in the ground, or maybe that's just the anticipation, a tantalizing possibility of uncovering a secret kept for millennia. The idea of a hall of records often gets linked with the psychic Edgar Cayce, who in the first half of the 20th century spoke in his trances of an ancient Atlantean civilization that purportedly stored its wisdom in a chamber near the Sphinx before their continent sank. While Cayce's prophecies are firmly in the realm of esoteric belief and not mainstream archaeology, they undeniably fueled popular fascination with the idea of hidden chambers and contributed to a fringe narrative that continues to this day. It's a compelling story, isn't it? A lost golden age, a cataclysm, and a desperate attempt to preserve wisdom for future generations. It taps into a deep human longing for a forgotten, more enlightened past. Even if it's just a story, it adds another layer of mystique to the already mysterious Giza Plateau. You almost want it to be true, just for the sheer Indiana Jones-ness of it all. But it's not just psychics and esoteric writers who have pondered what lies beneath the Sphinx's paws. More conventional archaeological and survey work has also explored this possibility, albeit with more caution and scientific rigor. Over the years, various teams have used seismographs, ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and acoustical sounding to search for anomalies in the bedrock beneath the Sphinx and its surrounding enclosure. And guess what? They've found some. Several surveys have indeed detected cavities and anomalies that could be interpreted as man-made chambers or passages. For example, a team from Waseda University in Japan, as well as researchers like Thomas DeBecke and Robert Schock in the early 1990s, reported finding evidence of such subsurface features. You can imagine the ripple of excitement, the eureka moment, even if heavily caveated. However, anomalies are not the same as confirmed chambers. The bedrock at Giza is known to be naturally fissured and varied in density. Historians still argue whether the detected anomalies beneath the Sphinx represent undiscovered artificial structures or are simply natural geological features, such as solution cavities or faults in the limestone. The Egyptian authorities, understandably protective of their most iconic monument, have been very cautious about allowing extensive, invasive drilling or excavation based on these remote sensing results. You can't just go dynamiting under the Sphinx's left paw because a GPR blip looked interesting. It's a bit like trying to diagnose a patient using only an X-ray from a distance without being able to do a biopsy. There's a lot of interpretation involved, and the stakes are incredibly high. Think about the implications if a genuine sealed chamber were found. What could it contain? Papyrus scrolls, miraculously preserved, detailing lost histories or scientific knowledge. Artifacts from a pre-dynastic culture, rewriting our understanding of Egyptian origins? Or perhaps nothing at all. Just an empty space, a natural void, or a forgotten, plundered shaft. The not knowing is almost as tantalizing as the prospect of discovery. A mainstream historical fact is that tombs and monuments in ancient Egypt often had complex substructures, including shafts, subsidiary chambers, and hidden compartments, designed to protect the burial and its goods from tomb robbers. So the idea of hidden elements associated with a major monument like the Sphinx isn't entirely outlandish from an Egyptological perspective. It's the Atlantean superknowledge part that raises eyebrows in academic circles. You can almost picture the scene, a small dedicated team, perhaps working at night to avoid the tourist crowds and the worst of the heat, carefully drilling a small borehole into one of these anomaly zones. The hushed anticipation, the whir of the drill, and then what? The drill bit breaks through into open space. or just grinds into more solid rock. It's the ultimate archaeological gamble. You're treading on sacred ground, both literally and metaphorically. A quirky tidbit is that there are already several known tunnels and shafts in and around the Sphinx, some ancient, some more. Recent explorations from treasure hunters or early excavators, none of which have led to the legendary Hall of Records, but they do show the monument has been probed many times over its long existence. These existing holes and passages add to the complexity, as some detected anomalies might just be these previously undocumented or forgotten explorations. It's like an old house with lots of previous renovations. It's hard to tell what's original and what's been added or disturbed later. The silence from beneath the Sphinx is, in its own way, as profound as the silence of its gaze. It represents the unknown, the unexcavated, the potential for discovery that still lies beneath the sands. It's a terrifying thought for an archaeologist, the possibility of a major find just out of reach, or the equal terror of investing years of effort only to find nothing. And for you, the armchair time traveler, it's a reminder that even the most studied, most photographed monument on Earth might still be holding on to its deepest secrets, waiting for the right technology, the right moment, or perhaps just the right alignment of stars before it chooses to reveal them. Or maybe it's just a very, very big stone lion, content to keep us guessing. That, in itself, is a pretty good trick for a statue that's thousands of years old. One has to respect its commitment to the bit, leaving the Giza Plateau, with its colossal monuments and their lingering questions. You find yourself drifting down the Nile, or perhaps across the centuries, to a different era in Egyptian history, yet one no less shrouded in mystery and, frankly, a good dose of high strangeness. We're talking about the Amarna period and its central figure, the pharaoh Akhenaten. If ever there was an Egyptian ruler who seemed to march to the beat of a very different and very peculiar drum, it was this guy. You can almost picture him, a figure of stark contrast to the traditional stoic pharaohs who came before and after him. He's a historical anomaly, a cultural disruptor, and the source of endless fascination and debate. Akhenaten, originally Amenhotep IV, ruled during the 18th dynasty, around the mid-1300s BCE. This was a golden age for Egypt, a time of immense power and wealth. Yet, early in his reign, he instigated a religious revolution that shook the foundations of Egyptian society. He abandoned Egypt's traditional polytheistic religion, with its complex pantheon of gods like Ammonius, Osiris, and Isis, and decreed the worship of a single deity, the Aten, represented as the sun disk, its rays ending in hands bestowing life. This was a radical departure, effectively establishing a form of monotheism, or perhaps more accurately, henotheism, the worship of one god while not denying the existence of others, in a culture deeply steeped in millennia of tradition. You can imagine the priests of Ammonius suddenly finding their temples closed, their power curtailed, and their livelihood threatened. They probably weren't sending Akhenaten any thank you cards. Heretic king is a label often applied to him, and from their perspective, it was entirely accurate. But it's not just his religious reforms that make Akhenaten so bizarre and unsettling. It's the art. The distinctive Amarna art style that emerged during his reign is unlike anything seen before or since in Egypt. Pharaohs were traditionally depicted as idealized, muscular, heroic figures. Akhenaten, however, is portrayed with strikingly unconventional features: an elongated skull, a long, slender neck, a prominent jaw, a potbelly, wide hips, and spindly limbs. His daughters are often shown with similarly exaggerated, almost pear-shaped heads. You look at these statues and reliefs, and the word alien almost inevitably springs to mind, even if you're trying to be a sensible, historically grounded observer. It's just weird. Really weird. A quirky tidbit is that some have speculated Akhenaten suffered from a medical condition like Marfan syndrome or Froelich syndrome, which could explain some of these physical peculiarities, though no definitive paleopathological evidence exists from his presumed mummy, if indeed it is his. This artistic style was deliberate. It wasn't a case of unskilled artists. It was a conscious choice, presumably dictated by Akhenaten himself, to break from a Thoth tradition. But why? Was it meant to symbolize a spiritual transformation, a physical manifestation of his unique connection to the Aten? Or was he genuinely physically distinct in this way, and chose to be depicted naturalistically, bucking the trend of idealized portraiture? Historians still argue whether the Amarna art style was purely symbolic, a radical artistic invention to match a radical religious shift, or if it reflected Akhenaten's actual physical appearance due to genetics or a medical condition. The debate is intense because it touches upon how we interpret ancient art, as literal representation or as symbolic language. If it's symbolic, what exactly is it symbolizing? An androgynous creator god? A departure from earthly concerns? It's like trying to decipher a code when you've lost the key, and the code is written in elongated skulls and potbellies. Akhenaten moved his capital from Thebes, the traditional religious center, to a brand new city he built in the desert, Akhenaten, horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. This city was built with incredible speed, a testament to his power and singular focus. You can imagine the scene, a sudden uprooting of the entire court, thousands of people migrating to this virgin site, all dedicated to the worship of this new faceless sun god. It must have been a disorienting, exhilarating, and perhaps terrifying time for those involved. What was it like to live in a city where every aspect of life, from art to architecture to religion, was being reinvented on the fly by a pharaoh who seemed to be channeling something entirely new, something almost otherworldly? The alien comparisons, while tempting for their sensationalism, often obscure the more grounded, yet equally fascinating, historical questions. Was Akhenaten a visionary mystic, a true believer who experienced a profound spiritual revelation? Or was he a canny political operator, using the Aten cult to break the immense power of the Ammonius priesthood? Or perhaps a combination of both? His hymn to the Aten, a beautiful piece of religious poetry attributed to him, certainly suggests a deep personal devotion. It speaks of the Aten as the sole creator, sustainer of all life, a universal god not just for Egyptians but for all peoples. It's a remarkable piece of literature, full of light and love for the natural world. You read it, and you almost forget about the weird statues for a moment. The terror here is not of monsters, but of radical change and the unsettling nature of a mind that could so completely overturn thousands of years of tradition. Akhenaten is a Rorschach test for historians and enthusiasts alike. Some see a pioneering monotheist, a forerunner of later religious thinkers. Others see a delusional tyrant whose obsessions nearly brought Egypt to ruin, neglecting foreign policy and creating internal dissent. The fact that his revolution was so short-lived, after his death, his son Tutankhamun, originally Tutankhaten, restored the old gods, and Akhenaten's name and monuments were systematically erased in an attempt to forget this heretical interlude, only adds to the mystery. It's like a dream that Egypt had, a strange, vivid, and ultimately unsettling dream, from which it tried to violently awaken. But the echoes of that dream, the strange art, the abandoned city, the lingering questions about this alien pharaoh, still haunt the sands. It's a reminder that even in a civilization as seemingly monolithic as ancient Egypt, there are moments of profound, almost terrifying individuality and upheaval as the dust settles on the abandoned city of Akhenaten and the memory of its strange, elongated pharaoh begins to fade. Another figure from this tumultuous Amarna period steps into the flickering torchlight of our investigation, and then, just as suddenly, vanishes. We're talking about Queen Nefertiti, Akhenaten's great royal wife. Her name means the beautiful one has come forth, and if her famous painted limestone bust, now in Berlin's Neues Museum, is anything to go by, the name was an understatement. She is, even now, one of the most recognizable icons of ancient Egyptian beauty and power. Yet, for all her fame, Her later years and ultimate fate are shrouded in one of Egypt's most tantalizing and frustrating mysteries. You can almost feel her presence, a whisper of silk and authority, and then silence. Nefertiti wasn't just a pretty face. The art and inscriptions from Akhenaten's reign show her playing an unusually prominent role, far more so than most Egyptian queens before her. She is depicted alongside Akhenaten in religious ceremonies, worshipping the Aten, and even in classic pharaonic smiting scenes, where the ruler is shown subduing enemies, a pose traditionally reserved for the king alone. This suggests she held significant religious and possibly political power, perhaps even acting as a co-regent with her husband. You see her in reliefs, almost as equal in stature, basking in the rays of the Aten, their elongated figures intertwined. It was a power couple for a new radical age. She bore Akhenaten's 6 daughters, and family scenes from Amarna are remarkably intimate and naturalistic, showing the royal couple playing with their children, a stark contrast to the formal, stiff depictions of earlier royal families. It paints a picture of a close-knit unit, at least on the surface, united in their devotion to the Aten. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is that while Nefertiti is famed for her beauty, depicted in the famous bust with slender neck and elegant features, some reliefs from early in Akhenaten's reign show her with the same exaggerated, almost grotesque features as her husband, including the potbelly and heavy thighs. This has led to speculation about whether the famous bust is an idealized image, or if her depiction evolved as the Amarna art style itself matured and perhaps softened slightly. Or maybe she just looked good in any art style, the supermodel of the 18th dynasty. Then, around year 12 or 14 of Akhenaten's roughly 17-year reign, Nefertiti disappears. Just like that. Poof. She vanishes from the historical record. No more depictions, no more inscriptions mentioning her. One of the most powerful and visible women in Egypt, seemingly at the height of her influence, simply ceases to be. What happened? This is the core of the mystery, and it's a real head-scratcher. Did she die? If so, why no record of her death or burial, especially for someone of her stature? Was she disgraced, banished, or did she fall out of favor with Akhenaten? There's no clear evidence for this either. You search the metaphorical palace halls of Akhenaten, and her chambers are suddenly, inexplicably empty. Several theories attempt to explain her vanishing act. One is that she did indeed die, perhaps from a plague that is known to have swept through Egypt around that time, or from other natural causes. The lack of a known tomb for her is a problem, but not an insurmountable one. Many royal tombs remain undiscovered or were thoroughly plundered and their original occupants lost to history. Another theory suggests that Nefertiti may have been elevated to the status of co-regent, adopting a new pharaonic name, Smenkhare, and ruling alongside or briefly after Akhenaten. The identity of Smenkhare is itself a major puzzle, with some scholars believing this was Nefertiti ruling as a female king, while others suggest Smenkhare was a male relative, perhaps a son or brother of Akhenaten. If Nefertiti became Smenkhare, her identity as Nefertiti would have effectively been subsumed by her new kingly role, explaining her disappearance under her original name. It's like a secret agent adopting a new cover identity, only on a pharaonic scale, a more dramatic, though less substantiated, theory is that Nefertiti had a falling out with Akhenaten, perhaps over religious doctrine or political strategy, and was either banished or chose to retire from public life. Given the radical nature of Akhenaten's reforms, it's not impossible to imagine significant internal tensions within the royal family itself. Historians still argue vehemently about Nefertiti's fate, with the Smenkhare theory being particularly divisive, as it involves reinterpreting existing evidence and challenging traditional gender roles for pharaohs. Each new inscription or artifact from the Amarna period is scrutinized for clues, but so far, no smoking gun has emerged to definitively solve the riddle of Nefertiti's silent throne. The terror here is the silence itself, the void left by such a prominent figure. It's the historical equivalent of a favorite character being inexplicably written out of a TV show mid-season, leaving you shouting at the screen. But what happened to them? It's deeply unsatisfying. You feel a sense of loss, not just for the historical record, but for the woman herself, whose vibrant presence illuminated the Amarna period so brightly, only to be snuffed out. Where did she go? Was her end peaceful, tragic, or did she simply step into a different role, her true identity hidden behind a new name and title? The famous bust, with its serene, knowing half-smile, seems to mock our confusion, guarding its secrets as closely as the Sphinx guards its own. It's a beautiful face, but it's a face that tells no tales about its owner's final act. And that, in itself, is a special kind of torment for those who seek to understand the past. It's a royal vanishing act that Houdini himself would have admired. From the enigmatic silence surrounding Nefertiti, we shift our gaze to perhaps the most famous Egyptian of them all, at least in modern popular culture, Tutankhamun, the Boy King. And with Tutankhamun comes one of ancient Egypt's most enduring and sensationalized mysteries, the Curse of the Pharaohs, specifically the alleged curse of Tutankhamun's tomb. You can almost hear the dramatic organ music swelling, the crackle of old movie newsreels. It's a story that has everything: fabulous treasure, an untimely death, and a string of mysterious fatalities that followed the tomb's opening. But is it a genuine ancient malediction, or just a classic case of media hype and coincidence? Let's tiptoe carefully, try not to disturb any spectral guardians. Tutankhamun, likely the son of Akhenaten, though his parentage is still debated, ascended to the throne as a child, around the age of 9, in the aftermath of the chaotic Amarna period. His reign was relatively short, about 10 years, from roughly 1332 to 1323 BCE. During his rule, under the guidance of his powerful viziers Ai and Horemheb, Egypt began the process of systematically reversing Akhenaten's religious reforms, restoring the worship of Ammon-Ra and the traditional pantheon, and moving the capital back to Thebes. He changed his name from Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Ammonius, to signify this religious shift. He was, in many ways, a transitional figure, a symbol of a return to orthodoxy. He died young, around age 18 or 19. The cause of his death has been a subject of much speculation. Was it murder, an accident, or illness? Modern CT scans and DNA analysis of his mummy have suggested a combination of factors, including a leg fracture that may have become infected and evidence of malaria and possibly a congenital bone disorder. Not quite as dramatic as a dagger in the back, but certainly a plausible end for a young man in ancient times. He was buried in a relatively small, hastily prepared tomb in the Valley of the Kings, KV 62. And there he lay, largely undisturbed, for over 3,000 years. A mainstream historical fact is that Tutankhamun's tomb is exceptionally significant not because he was a particularly powerful or long-reigning pharaoh, but because it was discovered almost entirely intact in 1922 by Howard Carter, funded by Lord Carnarvon, providing an unparalleled glimpse into the wealth and funerary practices of an Egyptian king. Most other royal tombs had been thoroughly plundered in antiquity. Wonderful things, Carter famously exclaimed upon first peering into the antechamber, and he wasn't kidding. The sheer opulence was staggering. Now about that curse. The popular legend really took off after Lord Carnarvon, the financial backer of the excavation, died a few months after the tomb's official opening in 1923. He died in Cairo from an infected mosquito bite that led to blood poisoning and pneumonia. This, combined with some sensationalist newspaper reporting eager for a spooky angle, ignited the curse narrative. Stories circulated about ominous inscriptions, though no actual curse inscription has ever been found in Tutankhamun's tomb itself, mysterious power outages at the moment of his death, and even his dog back in England supposedly howling and dying at the same time. It's the kind of stuff that makes for great headlines, but not necessarily great history. You can almost see the gleam in the eye of a 1920s tabloid editor. Pharaoh's Revenge. Millionaire lords struck down. Gold. Over the next decade or so, several other individuals connected, sometimes rather loosely, to the tomb's excavation or its contents also died. A quirky tidbit is that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes and a noted spiritualist, publicly declared his belief in the curse, suggesting that elementals or evil spirits guarded the tomb to protect the pharaoh's rest. This celebrity endorsement certainly fanned the flames. However, when you look at the statistics more soberly, the curse starts to look a lot less potent. Howard Carter himself, the man who spent a decade meticulously cataloging the thousands of artifacts, lived for another 16 years, dying at the age of 64. Many others directly involved lived long and healthy lives. Studies have shown that the lifespan of those who entered the tomb was not significantly different from that of a comparable group who did not. So, what could explain the curse beyond superstition and coincidence? One plausible, if less exciting, theory points to mundane earthly causes. Ancient tombs, sealed for millennia, can harbor molds, bacteria, and airborne pathogens that could, in theory, pose a health risk to those opening them, especially if their immune systems were compromised. Lord Carnarvon was already in somewhat frail health. Historians still argue whether there's any scientific basis for a tomb toxin theory, or if the deaths attributed to the curse were simply due to natural causes, amplified by the intense media scrutiny and the romantic appeal of an ancient malediction. It's a debate between the rational explanation and the thrillingly spooky one. And let's be honest, the spooky one sells more books and movie tickets. It's much more fun to imagine a spectral pharaoh unleashing his wrath than to talk about pathogenic fungi. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about earlier? Maybe they should have had some kind of ancient Egyptian hazmat suit for tomb opening. The terror here is less about a supernatural entity and more about the power of suggestion and the human tendency to find patterns in randomness, especially when primed by a good story. It's also a testament to how ancient Egypt, even in the 20th century, could still evoke a sense of awe, mystery, and a touch of fear. The idea that these ancient rulers possessed power that could transcend death and reach across millennia to strike down those who disturb their rest is a potent one. It plays into our primal fears of disturbing the dead, of desecrating sacred spaces. Even if you're a die-hard skeptic, you might feel a little prickle on your neck if you were the first to step into a pharaoh's long-sealed burial chamber. Just a little one. Perhaps you'd whistle a jaunty tune just to show you're not scared. No, not scared at all. It's a reminder that some stories are just too good, too perfectly terrifying to let go of easily, even in the face of rational explanation. The Curse of the Mummy is a cultural artifact in itself, almost as famous as the Golden Mask of Tutankhamun. Leaving the Valley of the Kings and its whispered curses behind, you find yourself journeying to another remarkable site, the Dendera Temple complex dedicated to the goddess Hathor. This is a relatively late temple by Egyptian standards, with much of the surviving structure dating to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, but it's built on the site of much older sanctuaries. It's famous for its stunning astronomical ceilings and its generally excellent state of preservation. But deep within its crypts, in dimly lit, narrow passages, are a series of reliefs that have sparked one of the most unusual and persistent out-of-place artifact theories in Egyptology, the Dendrolite. You squint in the imagined gloom, trying to make out these strange carvings, and a question forms in your mind. Did the ancient Egyptians have electricity? The reliefs in question depict elongated, bulb-like objects, each containing a wavy line or serpent extending from a lotus flower base. These bulbs are supported by jed pillars, symbols of stability often associated with the god Osiris, and a cable-like form extends from the base of the lotus, seemingly connecting to a box or pedestal. Inside each bulb, the serpent is shown. To some observers, particularly those outside mainstream Egyptology, These images bear an uncanny resemblance to Crookes tubes, an early type of electrical discharge tube, or modern arc lamps. You can see it, can't you? The filament serpent, the glass bulb, the electrical cable. It's an almost irresistible comparison, especially if you're already inclined to believe in lost ancient technologies. Proponents of the ancient electricity theory argue that these reliefs are schematics or depictions of actual electrical lighting devices used by the Egyptians, perhaps to illuminate the dark inner chambers of tombs and temples. They point to the lack of soot on the ceilings of many tombs as evidence that oil lamps or torches weren't always used, suggesting an alternative, clean light source was available. This is a key piece of their argument. If not torches, then what? Could these dendera bulbs be the answer? It's a tantalizing thought, a flash of anachronistic technology in the heart of antiquity. You can almost picture an ancient priest flicking a switch, or whatever the ancient Egyptian equivalent might be, perhaps clapping twice and saying Heka, and a soft glow illuminating the sacred hieroglyphs. However, mainstream Egyptologists offer a very different and far more symbolic interpretation. The prevailing scholarly view is that these reliefs are mythological and religious in nature, representing aspects of Egyptian creation myths and cosmology. The bulb is seen as the primordial lotus flower, a common symbol of creation, from which the snake god Harsomptus, a form of Horus, emerges, representing the rising sun or the birth of a deity. The jed pillar symbolizes stability and the backbone of Osiris, providing a foundation for this cosmic event. The cable is interpreted as the stem of the lotus, or perhaps symbolic of the primeval waters. The entire scene in this context is a visual metaphor for birth, creation, and the cyclical nature of life and the cosmos, entirely consistent with Egyptian religious iconography. No volts or amperes required. A quirky tidbit often brought up by supporters of the electrical interpretation is the so-called Baghdad battery, a collection of terracotta jars containing copper cylinders and iron rods, found near Baghdad and dating to the Parthian or Sasanian period a few centuries BCE to a few centuries CE. While not Egyptian, some have suggested these could have been simple galvanic cells capable of producing a low voltage, hinting at ancient knowledge of electrochemical principles. However, the purpose of the Baghdad battery is itself highly debated, with many archaeologists suggesting it was more likely used for electroplating or even just storing sacred scrolls. And even if it was a battery, there's no direct link to the dendera reliefs or ancient Egypt. It's a bit like finding a single AA battery in a Roman ruin and concluding they had television. So, who do you believe? The engineers and alternative researchers who see a clear visual parallel to modern technology, or the Egyptologists who interpret the scene through the lens of ancient Egyptian mythology and symbolism? Historians still argue whether the dendera reliefs are a genuine depiction of an unknown ancient technology or a purely symbolic representation of creation myths, with a lack of any supporting archaeological evidence for electrical devices in Egypt weighing heavily against the technological interpretation. It's a classic standoff, a picture that looks like one thing to modern eyes versus a deep understanding of an ancient culture's symbolic language. It's like showing a medieval peasant an iPhone. They might describe it as a magic scrying mirror, interpreting it through their own worldview, not as a piece of technology. The terrifying aspect here, if you lean towards the ancient electricity idea, is the thought of such advanced knowledge being lost, of a technological path not taken or deliberately suppressed. Imagine a world where some form of electrical understanding existed 2,000 years ago. How different would history be? Conversely, if it's purely symbolic, the terror is more subtle. It's the unease of realizing how easily we can project our own modern understanding onto the past, seeing what we want to see, or what our current frame of reference allows us to see. It's a warning against anachronistic thinking. You're standing in that dark crypt, the air cool and still. The stone reliefs are cold to the touch. Whether they depict a forgotten science or a profound mythological truth, they are undeniably strange and compelling. They force you to question your assumptions. If it's not electricity, then the ancient Egyptians had a truly unique and rather psychedelic way of depicting their gods and creation stories. And if it is electricity, well, that opens up a whole other sarcophagus of worms, doesn't it? It makes you wonder what other obvious depictions of modern tech might be lurking in plain sight on temple walls, just waiting for us to recognize them, or perhaps to misinterpret them with equal enthusiasm. Maybe that ink is actually a very stylish pair of ancient headphones. Unlikely, but it makes you think. You feel a shift in the historical winds, a sense of gathering storm clouds on the horizon. We're moving forward in time to the end of the Bronze Age, roughly around the 12th century BCE. This was a period of widespread upheaval, collapse, and transformation across the Near East, Aegean, and Eastern Mediterranean. Great empires faltered, cities were burned, trade routes were disrupted, and entire cultures vanished or were irrevocably changed. And one of the primary agents of this chaos, particularly for Egypt, was a mysterious and terrifying confederation of maritime raiders known collectively as the Sea Peoples. You can almost hear the alarm bells ringing in coastal towns, the panic shouts as strange ships appear on the horizon. The term Sea Peoples is a modern invention, but it's based on Egyptian records, particularly from the reigns of pharaohs Ramesses II, Merneptah, and most significantly Ramesses III. These texts and temple reliefs describe a coalition of different groups who launched major seaborne and land invasions against Egypt and other Mediterranean powers. A mainstream historical fact is that Ramesses III, in the 8th year of his reign, around 1177 BCE, decisively defeated a major invasion by the Sea Peoples in a combined land and naval battle near the Nile Delta, an event he commemorated in great detail on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu. These reliefs are our primary source of information about these enigmatic attackers, showing chaotic battle scenes with distinctive types of warriors, ships, and feathered headdresses. But who are these Sea Peoples? That's the million sestertii question. The Egyptian records list several distinct groups among them: the Peleset, the Checker, the Shikalesh, the Denyen, the Weshish, and others. Some of these names have tantalizing, though often debated, possible connections to known peoples or regions. For example, the Peleset are widely thought to be the Philistines, who later settled on the coast of Canaan. The Denyen have been linked to the Danans, Greeks, or the tribe of Dan. The Shikalesh might be connected to Sicily, Sicily. The Lucca are often identified with Lycia and Anatolia. But these are mostly educated guesses, linguistic associations that are far from concrete. You're looking at a lineup of suspects, and none of them have a definitive name tag. The terror these groups inspired was very real. They weren't just nuisance pirates. They were a migrating force, sometimes depicted with ox carts carrying their families and possessions, suggesting they were looking for new lands to settle, not just plunder. They swept through Anatolia, destroying the Hittite Empire, sacked wealthy cities like Ugarit in Syria, and threatened Cyprus. A quirky tidbit is that one of the few non-Egyptian contemporary accounts of the Sea Peoples comes from Ugarit in the form of desperate clay tablet letters appealing for aid as the city faced imminent destruction. One poignant letter from the king of Ugarit to the king of Alatia, Cyprus, states, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came here. My cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country." It's a chilling first-hand account of the Bronze Age collapse unfolding. You can almost feel the smoke stinging your eyes, the despair of a civilization on the brink. Imagine the scene from an Egyptian perspective. After centuries of relative stability and dominance, suddenly these unknown, aggressive groups are appearing from the sea, well-armed, well-organized, and seemingly unstoppable. They fought with a ferocity that shocked the established powers. The Medinet Habu reliefs show them in their distinctive horned helmets or feathered headdresses, wielding long swords and round shields, clashing with the Egyptian chariot armies and naval forces. Ramesses III's inscriptions boast of his great victory. "I have overthrown those who invaded them from their lands." I slew the Dinyin in their isles. The checker and the Pele set were made ashes. Strong words, but the very fact that such a monumental effort was needed to repel them speaks to the severity of the threat. What caused this mass movement of peoples? Why do they suddenly take to the seas in such numbers, causing such widespread destruction? Historians still argue about the primary drivers of the Sea Peoples' migrations and the wider Bronze Age collapse, with theories including climate change, prolonged drought and famine, internal rebellions, disruptions in trade routes, the rise of iron weaponry making old bronze-based armies obsolete, and a systems collapse where multiple interconnected societies fell like dominoes. It was likely a perfect storm of factors, a confluence of crises that destabilized the entire region. It's like a complex ecosystem where one key species dies off and the whole thing unravels. The fear they instilled was not just of physical destruction, but of the unknown. These weren't familiar enemies with predictable motives. They were a shadowy force, emerging from the mists of the sea, speaking unknown languages, fighting with unfamiliar tactics. They represented a fundamental breakdown of order, the end of an era. For a highly ordered society like Egypt, which valued harmony, order, justice, above all else, this was a profound existential threat. You can almost hear the Egyptian priests frantically chanting, trying to restore Marat in the face of this onslaught of Isfit chaos. The Medinet Habu reliefs, while a record of Egyptian triumph, are also a chilling testament to the brutality of the conflict. Piles of severed hands, a common Egyptian way of counting enemy dead, captive sea peoples being led away, ships capsizing in a chaotic naval battle. It's a visceral depiction of ancient warfare. And even though Ramesses III claimed a decisive victory, the threat lingered. Some sea peoples, like the Peleset Philistines, did end up settling in Canaan, becoming a persistent thorn in Egypt's side for centuries. The world had changed. The old Bronze Age order was shattered, and a new, more fragmented Iron Age was dawning. The Sea Peoples were both a symptom and a cause of this cataclysmic transition. Their shadowy ships sail through the darkest pages of ancient history, leaving a wake of terror and unanswered questions. It's a stark reminder that even the greatest civilizations are vulnerable, that the tides of history can turn with devastating speed, and that sometimes the monsters at the gate are very, very real. The echo of clashing bronze and the cries of battle from Ramesses III's Medinet Habu relief still linger in your mind. You've seen the chaos the Sea Peoples wrought, the terror they spread across the Mediterranean world, bringing mighty empires to their knees. But the fundamental question remains, gnawing at the edges of historical understanding. Who exactly were they? We have the Egyptian list of names: Peleset, Sheker, Shikalesh, Dinyin, Weshish, Lukka, Shardana, Aquesh, but attaching firm, universally accepted identities to these names is like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. It's one of ancient history's most frustrating and enduring whodunits. The Shardana are perhaps one of the more intriguing groups, as they appear in Egyptian records even before the main Sea Peoples invasions, serving as mercenaries in the Egyptian army under Ramesses II at the Battle of Kadesh. They are often depicted with distinctive horned helmets, round shields, and long swords, and a popular theory links them to Sardinia, based on the similarity of the names and some archaeological finds of similar weaponry on the island. If this is true, it suggests that some of these groups had complex relationships with Egypt, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as allies or employees. It wasn't necessarily a simple case of us versus them. It's like finding out some of the pirates were also moonlighting as your security guards. Awkward. The Peleset, as we mentioned, are the strongest candidate for a positive identification, almost universally equated with the Philistines who settled on the southern coast of Canaan, modern-day Israel and Palestine. The biblical narrative describes the Philistines as originating from Kaftor, which is often identified with Crete or the Aegean region. Archaeological evidence from Philistine sites shows pottery styles and architectural features that have strong Aegean connections, lending further support to this theory. So, for the Pele set, at least, we have a plausible origin story and a known destination. You can almost draw a line on the map, albeit a slightly wobbly one. But for many of the other groups, the picture is far murkier. The Denyen are sometimes linked to the Danaoi, one of the names for the Greeks in Homeric epics, or to the tribe of Dan from the Hebrew Bible, or even to Adana in Cilicia, southeastern Turkey. The Aquesh have been tentatively identified with the Achaeans, another name for Greeks, particularly due to an inscription from the reign of Merneptah that mentions them as being circumcised, a practice not common among most Aegean peoples at the time, which adds another layer of confusion. A quirky tidbit is that this mention of circumcision for the Aquesh has led some to dismiss the Achaean link, while others try to find ways to accommodate it, perhaps suggesting a specific subgroup or a misunderstanding on the part of the Egyptian scribes. It's amazing how one tiny detail can throw a wrench into an entire theory. The Checker, another prominent group who fought Ramesses III and later settled at Dor in Canaan, have been linked to the Teucrians, early inhabitants of Troy, or to peoples from Cyprus. The Weshish remain almost completely enigmatic, with no widely accepted identification. And the Lucca are generally associated with the later region of Lycia in southwestern Anatolia, a land known for its pirates in later classical times. It's a bewildering patchwork of possibilities, a geopolitical puzzle with half the pieces missing and the other half ambiguously shaped. Historians still argue intensely over the precise origins and identities of most of the sea peoples, with debates often hinging on fine points of linguistics, iconography in Egyptian reliefs, and scattered archaeological finds. Each new discovery, a sherd of pottery or a fragmentary inscription, can reignite old debates or spark new ones. It's a slow, painstaking process of historical detective work. Why is it so hard to pin them down? Several factors contribute to the frustration. Firstly, we are heavily reliant on Egyptian sources, which are naturally biased and view these groups through an Egyptian lens. Their names are Egyptian renderings of foreign words, which can distort the originals. Secondly, these groups were likely not monolithic nations in the modern sense, but rather confederations of different tribes, warrior bands, and displaced peoples brought together by circumstance. Their composition might have been fluid, changing over time. Trying to assign a single origin point to such a diverse coalition is inherently problematic. It's like trying to identify the exact origin of everyone in a massive, desperate refugee caravan fleeing a continent-wide disaster. They're from all over. The terror of this particular mystery lies in its shapelessness. These weren't just invaders. They were, in a sense, the faceless harbingers of a dark age. Their lack of a clear, singular identity makes them almost more frightening, a diffuse threat emerging from all corners of the known world. They represent the other, the barbarian at the gates, whose motives and origins are obscure. It's the fear of an enemy you don't fully understand whose next move is unpredictable. You can almost feel the ancient strategists in Egypt and other kingdoms poring over maps, trying to figure out where these threats were coalescing, who was allied with whom, and failing to get a clear picture. The search for the Sea People's origins is not just an academic exercise. It's an attempt to understand the massive societal collapse that occurred at the end of the Bronze Age. If we knew who they were and where they came from, we might better understand why they moved, why they attacked, and why so many established civilizations crumbled before them. Were they victims of climate change, driven from their homelands by famine? Were they ambitious warlords seeking new territories? Were they a peasant revolt on a grand scale? Or all of the above? Their anonymity is a constant reminder of how much we still don't know about this pivotal period in human history. They remain ghosts on the historical stage, their names recorded, their impact undeniable, but their faces and true stories largely lost to the sea and the sand. And that enduring mystery is, in its own way, as chilling as any curse or monster. From the chaos of the Sea Peoples and the Bronze Age collapse, you find yourself drifting back in time, but also forward, into the realm of legendary lost structures. We're searching for something that, if it truly existed as described, would have been one of the wonders of the ancient world, perhaps even rivaling the pyramids in its complexity and grandeur, the labyrinth of horror. This isn't a simple maze you might find in a garden. This was said to be a colossal architectural marvel, a sprawling complex of halls, chambers, and courtyards so vast and intricate that it defied easy description. And now it's vanished so completely that its very existence is debated. You're sifting through the sands near the Fayum oasis, south of modern Cairo, hoping for a glimpse, a whisper of this lost wonder. Our primary source for the labyrinth comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BCE, long after the structure was supposedly built, but while it, or significant parts of it, apparently still stood. Herodotus described the labyrinth in awestruck terms, claiming it surpassed even the pyramids in its wonder. He wrote of 12 covered courts with gates facing each other, 6 on the north side and 6 on the south, all within a single surrounding wall. He claimed it had 3,000 chambers, 1,500 below ground and 1,500 above, which he himself visited, the upper ones at least. He wasn't allowed into the subterranean chambers, which supposedly contained the tombs of kings who built the labyrinth and sacred crocodiles. He said the variety of passages, the intricate windings from court to court and room to room, were an endless wonder to him. You can almost feel his historian's glee, a child in an ancient stony candy shop. He attributed its construction to a council of 12 kings who once ruled Egypt, though it is more commonly associated with the pharaoh Amenemhat III of the 12th dynasty, who ruled in the 19th century BCE. His pyramid stands near the site of Hira, and adjacent to it are the remains of a vast mud brick foundation, which many archaeologists believe is the footprint of the legendary labyrinth, likely Amenemhat III's mortuary temple. A mainstream historical fact is that Amenemhat III built a large and complex mortuary temple at Hira, and it is this structure that is generally identified with the labyrinth described by classical authors like Herodotus, Strabo, and Pliny the Elder. These later writers also described it in glowing terms, adding to its legendary status. Strabo, for instance, spoke of its numerous courts roofed with single stone slabs and lined with interconnected pillars. So, if it was so massive, so famous, what happened to it? Why is there so little left to see today? The answer, sadly, lies in its building materials and the relentless march of time and human activity. Unlike the pyramids, which were primarily stone, much of the labyrinth, especially its vast foundation and many of its walls, was likely built of mud brick, with finer stone elements like columns, lintels, and casing. A quirky tidbit is that the Hira region, particularly during the Roman period, became a major quarry site, and the labyrinth's valuable stone elements were systematically plundered and carted away for reuse in other buildings or burned for lime. It was essentially recycled into oblivion. You can imagine Roman engineers, pragmatic as ever, eyeing this vast, decaying structure and thinking, look at all that lovely pre-cut stone. Shame to let it go to waste. A tragic end for such a marvel. The subterranean chambers mentioned by Herodotus, said to contain the tombs of kings and sacred crocodiles, add another layer of mystery. Were these real, or part of the mystique and religious awe surrounding the place? Crocodile cults were indeed prominent in the Fayum region, and mummified crocodiles have been found in vast numbers nearby. The idea of a sacred underground necropolis for these revered reptiles, perhaps alongside royal burials, isn't entirely far-fetched in the Egyptian context. Imagine stumbling into one of those lower chambers, filled with rows upon rows of mummified crocodiles, their toothy grins preserved for eternity. That's a special kind of terrifying, reserved for those with a particular phobia of ancient, bandaged reptiles. Probably not great for your allergies either. All that ancient dust and bitumen, the search for the labyrinth today is a frustrating one. While the general location at Hira is known, and the massive mud brick foundations mapped by archaeologists like Flinders Petrie in the late 19th century confirm a colossal structure, the glories described by Herodotus are gone. Petrie found fragments of stone statues, inscriptions, and evidence of the systematic destruction. Historians still argue about the exact layout and scale of the labyrinth, and how much of Herodotus's account was accurate versus exaggerated or based on second-hand information from priests who might have been embellishing its wonders for a curious visitor. Was he truly seeing a multi-story complex of 3,000 rooms, or was he perhaps guided through a still impressive but more conventional, albeit very large, mortuary temple, his imagination and perhaps the clever storytelling of his guides, filling in the gaps? The terror of the lost labyrinth is the terror of irreversible loss, of something magnificent being erased from the world. It's the thought that even the grandest human creations can be reduced to dust and faint memories. If something so vast and renowned could vanish, what else have we lost without even a Herodotus to record its passing? It's a chilling reminder of the fragility of heritage. You stand on the dusty, unassuming plain of Hora and try to conjure the image of this sprawling architectural dream with its endless passages and hidden courts. The silence of the site is heavy with the weight of what is no longer there. It's a ghost of a building, a phantom of stone and legend, and its absence is almost as awe-inspiring, in a melancholy way, as its presence must have been. It serves as a warning. Don't take your architectural wonders for granted. Someone might turn them into lime kilns a few centuries down the line. From the ghostly footprint of the lost labyrinth, our journey now takes us into one of the more macabre and unsettling corners of Egyptian archaeology, to a single, anonymous individual whose final moments seem to be etched into his very remains, the screaming mummy, also known as Unknown Man-E. You're in a hushed museum gallery, or perhaps an archaeologist's lab, and before you lies a mummy unlike any other. There's no serene, idealized face, no peaceful repose. Instead, the head is thrown back, the jaw agape, the facial muscles taut, conveying an expression of profound agony or a silent, eternal scream. It's a genuinely chilling sight, a visceral connection to a human being who clearly did not die peacefully. This particular mummy was discovered in 1881 in the Deir el-Bahari Royal Cache, DB 320, a tomb near Luxor that had been used as a hiding place by New Kingdom priests to protect a large number of royal mummies from rampant tomb robbing. Alongside famous pharaohs like Ramesses II and Seti I, this anonymous individual was found, his burial highly unusual and indicative of a rushed, perhaps even disrespectful, interment. He was found in a plain, undecorated cedar coffin, not the elaborate gilded affairs typical of royalty. More strikingly, his body was not fully mummified in the traditional, meticulous way. While there was some evidence of natron treatment, the process seems to have been incomplete or improperly done. And most unusually, he was wrapped in a sheepskin or goatskin, materials considered ritually impure in ancient Egyptian funerary practices. You can almost feel the unease of the priests who had to handle this body, this anomaly among kings. Who was this man, and why was he buried in such a peculiar manner, with such a horrifying expression? For decades, theories abounded. Was he poisoned? Buried alive? A victim of some terrible ritual? The contorted face, the open mouth, it seemed to cry out for an explanation. A quirky tidbit from early examinations was the speculation that he might have been a foreign prince who died in Egypt under suspicious circumstances, or perhaps an Egyptian noble who had committed some heinous crime and was thus denied a proper burial. The sheepskin wrap, in particular, fueled theories of disgrace, as it was seen as a symbol of impurity, perhaps meant to prevent the deceased from entering the afterlife. It's like being buried in your pajamas, if your pajamas were made of shame and bad omens. For many years, a leading candidate for the identity of Unknown Man-E was Prince Pintar, a son of Pharaoh Ramesses III. Historical records, specifically the Harem Conspiracy Papyrus, detail a plot by one of Ramesses III's lesser wives, Tai, to assassinate the pharaoh and place her son, Pintar, on the throne. The plot was discovered, and conspirators were tried and condemned. The papyrus states that Pintar took his own life, though the method isn't specified. Could unknown man be Prince Pintar, forced to commit suicide, perhaps by poison or ritualistic means, and then given a deliberately ignominious burial as punishment for his treason? The timeline fits, and the unusual burial would certainly be consistent with that of a disgraced traitor. You can imagine the scene: the condemned prince, his world collapsing, his face contorted in his final desperate moments. However, modern forensic analysis, including CT scans and DNA testing, has shed new light on this old mystery and complicated the Pintar theory somewhat. While the initial DNA studies in the early 2010s suggested a father-son relationship between Ramesses III, whose mummy was also in the cache, and unknown man, thus strongly supporting the Pintar identification, more recent interpretations and re-examinations of the evidence have introduced some doubt. Some scholars now argue that the genetic link isn't as definitive as first thought, or that even if he is Pintar, the cause of death might not be as straightforward as a simple suicide followed by a shaming burial. What about that horrifying scream? Was he actually screaming at the moment of death? More recent forensic analysis suggests that the scream is likely a post-mortem phenomenon, the result of the jaw falling open after death due to the relaxation of muscles, combined with the head tilting back during the mummification or wrapping process, and then being set in that position by the hardening resins and bandages. It's a less dramatic explanation, perhaps, but a more scientifically plausible one. It doesn't mean his death wasn't agonizing, but the facial expression itself might not be a direct snapshot of his final living instant. It's a bit like how a sleeping person's mouth can fall open, not necessarily a sign of a nightmare, just gravity doing its thing. Still, even if it's post-mortem, it's an undeniably effective expression of something having gone terribly wrong. The terror of the screaming mummy is visceral and immediate. It's not an intellectual puzzle about construction techniques or lost histories. It's a human face frozen in an apparent moment of ultimate distress. It forces you to confront the reality of individual suffering in the ancient world, beyond the gilded treasures and grand monuments. It reminds you that behind the hieroglyphs and statues were real people, capable of experiencing immense pain, fear, and despair. Historians still debate the precise identity and cause of death of unknown man, and whether the sheepskin burial was a mark of ultimate disgrace or had some other, now lost significance in specific, unusual circumstances. The mystery endures, even as science peels back some of its layers. Even if the scream isn't a literal last cry, the circumstances of his burial, the rushed mummification, the ritually impure wrapping, the plain coffin amidst royalty, all point to a story of tragedy, disgrace, or at the very least, profound abnormality. He is a stark anomaly, a question mark in human form, lying amidst the carefully preserved remains of Egypt's most powerful rulers. His silent scream echoes down the centuries, a chilling reminder that some stories and some fates are too disturbing to be easily forgotten. He remains a terrifying testament to a very bad end. Our journey through Egypt's unexplained terrors is nearing its end, but one more iconic figure, and her equally iconic lost resting place, demands our attention. We're searching for the tomb of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, and her Roman lover, Mark Antony. Their story is one of passion, power, ambition, and ultimately, tragedy, a grand opera played out on the world stage. Yet, for all their fame, for all the words written about them by Roman and Greek historians, their final burial site remains one of history's most sought-after and elusive archaeological prizes. You can almost feel the humid Alexandrian air, thick with intrigue and the scent of impending doom. Cleopatra VII, a descendant of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander the Great's generals, ruled Egypt during a tumultuous period of Roman expansion. She was a formidable political operator, intelligent, multilingual, and determined to preserve Egypt's independence. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were as much about political alliance as they were about personal romance. A mainstream historical fact is that after their defeat by Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, and Octavian's subsequent invasion of Egypt, both Antony and Cleopatra chose suicide in Alexandria in 30 BCE rather than face capture and humiliation in a Roman triumph. Antony famously fell on his sword, while Cleopatra, according to legend, died by the bite of an asp, a venomous Egyptian cobra, smuggled into her chambers in a basket of figs. It's a dramatic end, fitting for such larger-than-life figures. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio tell us that Octavian, despite being their enemy, allowed Cleopatra and Antony to be buried together honorably and possibly even in a tomb that Cleopatra herself had begun constructing for them. Plutarch mentions it was near a temple of Isis in Alexandria and was a lofty and beautiful monument containing fabulous treasures of gold, silver, emeralds, pearls, ebony, and ivory. So, we have contemporary accounts suggesting a known, magnificent tomb. What then can't we find it? You think a lofty and beautiful monument filled with treasure would leave some trace, wouldn't you? The main challenge is Alexandria itself. The ancient city, a vibrant cosmopolitan center of learning and trade, has been continuously occupied and rebuilt for over 2 millennia. Much of ancient Alexandria, particularly the royal quarter where Cleopatra's palace and presumably her tomb were located, now lies submerged beneath the waters of the harbor due to earthquakes and subsidence, or buried deep beneath the modern city. It's like trying to find a specific needle in a haystack where the haystack is underwater and also has a modern city built on top of it. Not exactly ideal conditions for an archaeological dig. Remember those easy-to-find pyramids out in the desert? This is the opposite of that. This is urban archaeology on hard mode, with scuba certification required. Despite these difficulties, the search continues. Archaeologists have been exploring the submerged remains of ancient Alexandria for decades, discovering incredible artifacts, including parts of palaces, temples, and even what are believed to be Cleopatra's royal barges. A quirky tidbit is that one prominent theory championed by archaeologist Kathleen Martinez focuses not on Alexandria itself, but on a site about 30 miles west called Taposiris Magna. This temple complex, dedicated to Osiris and by extension Isis, with whom Cleopatra strongly identified, has yielded some tantalizing clues, including coins bearing Cleopatra's image, shafts leading to what could be tombs, and a cemetery with Greco-Roman mummies buried facing the temple, suggesting it was a significant religious site during her reign. Martinez believes Cleopatra might have arranged for her and Antony to be buried there, in a more secluded and religiously symbolic location, away from the turmoil of Alexandria. The Taposiris Magna theory is compelling, if still unproven. Excavations there are ongoing, and each new discovery fuels hope. Imagine the moment, a spade striking something solid, the careful clearing of debris, and then an inscription, a cartouche, something definitively linking a chamber to Cleopatra or Antony. It would be the archaeological discovery of the century, perhaps of any century. Historians still argue whether the tomb is more likely to be found within the traditional confines of ancient Alexandria, now largely inaccessible, or if a location like Taposiris Magna offers a more plausible, if less historically attested, alternative. It's a debate between sticking to the ancient texts, which point to Alexandria, and following archaeological intuition and the practicalities of where a tomb might have survived. The terror associated with this mystery isn't about curses or monsters. It's the fear of the ultimate historical anticlimax, that their tomb was destroyed long ago, its treasures plundered, its stones reused, its exact location lost forever to the shifting coastline and the relentless development of a modern city. Or perhaps it's right under everyone's noses, beneath a modern apartment building or a busy street, completely inaccessible. The thought of such a significant piece of history being irretrievably lost is a source of profound frustration for historians and romantics alike. It's like the final chapter of an epic novel has been torn out. Cleopatra's story and her lost tomb represent the end of an era, the end of pharaonic Egypt, the end of the Hellenistic age, and the final consolidation of Roman power over the Mediterranean. Finding her tomb would be more than just an archaeological triumph. It would be a direct, physical link to one of history's most fascinating and pivotal women. Her intelligence, her ambition, her defiance of Rome all make her a figure of enduring interest. You can almost see her plotting, charming, ruling, and finally facing her end with a queen's resolve. To find her resting place would be to honor that legacy, to give her story a final, tangible anchor in the physical world. Until then, she remains an enigma, her tomb a tantalizing ghost, whispering from beneath the waves or the desert sands, daring us to find her. It's a treasure hunt where the prize is not just gold, but a piece of history's soul. And so our journey through ancient Egypt's most terrifying and unexplained mysteries draws to a close. We've stood before the impossible stones of Giza, ventured into the speculative darkness of Khufu's internal ramps, and felt the Sphinx's timeless, enigmatic stare. We've pondered what might lie beneath its paws, recoiled from Akhenaten's almost alien visage, and searched in vain for the vanished Queen Nefertiti. We've tiptoed around Tutankhamun's supposed curse, squinted at Dendra's strange glow, and felt the chill of the Sea People's destructive arrival, their identities still frustratingly obscure. We've sifted the sands for Hawar's lost labyrinth, confronted the visceral horror of the screaming mummy, and joined the ongoing quest for Cleopatra's final resting place. Each enigma, a testament to a civilization that, for all its monumental efforts at remembrance, still holds so many secrets. Why do these mysteries persist? Why, after centuries of exploration, excavation, and scholarship, do these particular puzzles continue to baffle and captivate us? Part of it, of course, is the sheer antiquity involved. We're dealing with thousands of years, with records that are often fragmentary, biased, or entirely missing. The destructive power of time itself, erosion, earthquakes, the plundering of stone for later buildings, the decay of organic materials like papyrus has taken an enormous toll on the evidence. It's like trying to assemble a million-piece jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are lost, and many of the remaining ones are faded or broken. You can see the outline, perhaps, but the full picture remains frustratingly out of reach. Then there's the nature of the ancient Egyptian mindset itself. Their worldview, their religion, their symbolism were profoundly different from our own. We look at their art and architecture through modern eyes with modern assumptions, and we risk misinterpreting their intentions, seeing technological marvels where they saw mythological allegories, or vice versa. A quirky tidbit is that even the ancient Greeks, who were much closer in time and cultural context to the Egyptians, often misunderstood or romanticized Egyptian practices and beliefs, creating a layer of interpretation that we, in turn, have inherited. Herodotus, for all his invaluable reporting, was also a product of his time, sometimes repeating tall tales told to him by priests or local guides. It's like a game of historical telephone, where the message gets subtly altered with each retelling. The terrifying aspect of these mysteries, as we've explored, isn't always about supernatural spooks or ancient curses, though those elements certainly add a delicious shiver to the popular imagination. Often, the terror is more existential, the fear of the unknown, the unsettling realization of how much history is lost or deliberately obscured, the vertigo of contemplating vast gulfs of time and cultural difference. It's the chilling thought that even a civilization as obsessed with legacy as ancient Egypt could ultimately fail to transmit its full story, its deepest secrets to the future. Or perhaps, in some cases, they succeeded all too well in creating enigmas designed to endure, to keep us guessing. Historians still argue whether certain mysteries were intentionally crafted as such by the Egyptians themselves, perhaps as a way to enhance the sacredness or impenetrability of their monuments and rulers. Were they the ultimate puzzle makers, leaving behind clues that were meant to tantalize but never fully satisfy? Consider the sheer scale of their ambition. Building the pyramids, carving the Sphinx, establishing a new religion and capital city like Akhenaten did. These were acts of almost superhuman will and organization. When we struggle to comprehend how they did it with their known technology, it's tempting to invoke lost sciences or even extraterrestrial intervention. But perhaps the real mystery, the real lost technology, was their unparalleled ability to mobilize and direct human labor, their profound understanding of practical engineering, and a societal focus and cohesion that we can barely imagine today. Maybe the most terrifying thing is that they were just humans, pushing the boundaries of human capability to astonishing limits. It makes you wonder what we might be capable of if we had that same kind of singular, multi-generational focus. Probably a really, really big shopping mall. The enduring appeal of these mysteries also lies in their connection to fundamental human questions. The pyramids and tombs speak to our obsession with death, legacy, and the afterlife. Akhenaten's story grapples with religious belief and radical change. The Lost Labyrinth hints at forgotten wisdom. Cleopatra's Fate is a timeless drama of love, power, and loss. These aren't just dusty historical puzzles. They resonate with our own hopes, fears, and curiosities. They remind us that for all our technological advancement, we still grapple with the same big questions that preoccupy the ancient Egyptians. And so, the desert sands continue to shift, revealing tantalizing glimpses of the past one moment and burying them again the next. Each new discovery, whether it's a previously unknown chamber detected by cosmic ray muons in the Great Pyramid, or a fragment of an inscription that sheds new light on a forgotten queen, adds another piece to the puzzle. But it often raises new questions as well. The mysteries of ancient Egypt are not static. They are an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present, a conversation that will likely continue for generations to come. They are a testament to a civilization that, even in its silence, still speaks to us, challenging us, mystifying us, and yes, sometimes terrifying us with the sheer depth of its enduring enigmas. The land of the pharaohs has not given up all its secrets, not by a long shot. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Some mysteries are all the more compelling for remaining unsolved. The night has grown deeper now, and the whispers from those ancient sands are beginning to fade into the quiet hum of your own surroundings. The immense stones of Giza settle back into the dreamscape, their riddles unresolved. The enigmatic smile of the Sphinx dissolves into the shadows, its secrets held close for another dawn. Akhenaten's strange sun disk dips below the horizon of your mind, and Nefertiti's silent throne remains poignantly empty. Tutankhamun rests once more, his supposed curse a fading echo. The glow of Dendera dims, the roar of the sea peoples recedes into the mists of time, and the labyrinth's phantom corridors become indistinct. The screaming mummy's silent cry is absorbed by the stillness, and Cleopatra's lost tomb remains a shimmering mirage just beyond reach. These mysteries, these terrifying and tantalizing gaps in our knowledge, are not meant to keep you from sleep, but rather to remind you of the vastness of time, the richness of human history, and the enduring power of the unknown. The ancient Egyptians, in their wisdom and their enigmatic ways, understood the allure of things not fully explained, of a story that continues to unfold long after its tellers have turned to dust. Let these thoughts settle now, like fine sand drifting over ancient landscapes. There is a strange comfort in knowing that some questions may never be answered, some doors may never be opened. It leaves room for wonder, for imagination, for the quiet contemplation that often precedes the deepest sleep. The desert night is vast and peaceful. The stars that watched over the pharaohs now watch over you. Allow yourself to drift, to float on the gentle current of oncoming rest, carrying with you not the terror, but the awe. Let the unsolved be a lullaby. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye and see you again in the next stories.